Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining. My name is Andrea. I am the head of partnerships and comms at Astriid. Astriid is a UK charity helping people with long-term health issues find meaningful employment. A little bit about our topic today. There are an estimated 260,000 people living with myalgic encephalomyelitis, or ME, or chronic fatigue syndrome in the UK alone. Many living with the illness will have to find ways to adapt, including when it comes to their work. Inclusive businesses have to learn how to manage those suffering from the illness while still hitting business targets and keeping everyone engaged. So some of the topics we will be covering today: what are the things to consider when one of your employees has ME, CFS? How can a team be inclusive and ensure everyone's well-being in the process? As an employee, what are the things your employer should know about your condition, and how do you have that sometimes difficult conversation? Before I go on to my guests, a quick reminder that there is a Q&A section at the bottom of your screen. Feel free to send us your questions. Now, here's who I have with me today. I have Brooke Willing, Marketing and Communications in Altran. Welcome. We have Victoria Clutton, SharePoint Coordinator at Altran UK. Welcome, Victoria. We have Ruth Richardson, Operations Director, Deputy CEO, Action for ME. Thank you for joining us. We have Evan Francis, Marketing and Communications Manager. Thank you for being here, Evan. And we have Louisa Lambert, HR Business Partner. Thank you for joining us. Before we go on to the topic, can I go back to each of you and hear a little bit about who you are and what you do? I've started with Brooke, so I'll go back with Brooke. Brooke, can you tell our attendees a little bit about yourself, please?
Oh, of course, yes. So my name's Brooke Willing. I am the sole responsible person for marketing and communications in the UK for the engineering company Altran. We belong to the larger group of Capgemini, and we have kind of large clients like Airbus, Rolls-Royce, Network Rail, that kind of thing.
Thank you so much. Victoria? Victoria, can you hear me? I'm not sure she can. So why don't I?
Hello.
Not sure she can hear us, but that's okay. We'll figure it out. Shall I go back to? Shall I go to Evan? Evan, could you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Hello, I'm Evan. Everyone calls me Ev. I was diagnosed with ME back in 2017. I do work full time. It's something you have to manage. I've experienced really good employers, but I've also experienced really bad employers, and I want to be able to use this webinar and this platform to give some form of understanding for you guys, both as patients with ME, but also employers, to be able to make a workplace both safe and accommodating to those with chronic illness.
Thank you so much for joining us, Evan. Ruth, do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself and Action for ME?
Oh, hello everyone, I'm Ruth Richardson. I'm the Ops Director at Action for ME. We are a UK-wide charity that supports adults and children with ME, and we exist to end the ignorance and injustice that people with this condition experience. We run a number of services for people who have ME, including advice and support via a helpline. We also have advocacy services, including helping people to gain reasonable adjustments in their employment, which is hopefully relevant to today's webinar. And thanks for having me on today.
Thank you for joining us. I look forward to learning from your experience. Louisa, would you like to tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do?
Yeah, hi there. So I'm Louisa Lambert. I'm an HR business partner, and I've worked in the financial services industry for many years now. So I have the perspective of working with employees who have chronic fatigue syndrome and ME. But my main reason for being here today is because I also suffer with fibromyalgia, and I have done for about probably 5 years now. So I have the perspective of working in HR, but also personal perspective of having to work and deal with a similar medical condition to ME.
Thank you for sharing. I look forward to hearing more about your experience. Victoria, can you're back with us. Can you hear us now?
Yes, I can.
Wonderful. Well, I would love to hear a little bit about you and what you do and your experience with Astriid, because you are one of our ambassadors. So I would love to hear a little bit about that.
So I am a SharePoint coordinator for Altran. I build and maintain their intranet for them. My experience with Astriid was magical and amazing, and they basically took me from never having had a job in my life or a successful getting to an interview stage to having my first ever job in 2 weeks. It was astounding.
Thank you so much for joining us, Victoria, and sharing that. I want to start with a somewhat general question. I'll go to Ruth for that. Ruth, we definitely have a lot of potential employers watching us right now. So if we were to summarize the main things that an employer should know about ME CFS, what are those things?
Oh, that's a large question, because ME is a fluctuating condition. So there's not ever one description of how ME can impact people. So I think approaching it flexibly and understanding that as well as being a fluctuating condition, there's quite a large spectrum of how ME can impact people is a really helpful way of going about any conversations with employees or prospective employees. And there are some characteristics that are more common among people with ME, and one of those is obviously fatigue itself, characterised by post-exertional malaise. So this is when an individual can do even a small amount of energy expending and then have what's called payback, which is where it can take a few days or even weeks for an individual to sort of overcome this exertion. They often experience pain. There can be sensitivity to light or to sounds, and cognitive difficulties, which is often called brain fog by people with ME. But that's not to say that people with ME don't have a wealth of skills, experience, and attitude to offer any employer.
So in one word, you would say be flexible
Absolutely.
Okay, that's a very good word for us to put down. Thank you for sharing. Now, again, from the employer's perspective, what are the steps for sourcing employees from this very specific talent pool? Shall I go to Brooke for that, because you have experience in that space?
Yeah, sure. So I would definitely say the most important step of recruiting somebody with ME is understanding the role that you've got. They can't just fill any role that you feel is out there. It has to be a very flexible role, as you said, and it has to be one that is kind of has a purpose. The biggest thing for us, and the sole reason it was successful, was Astriid. We came to the table understanding what we wanted and what we needed, and Victoria came to the table understanding exactly the same thing. And it's 3 years down the line and it's still a really successful partnership. So I think that's one of the biggest things. And also in a conversation that we had yesterday, Victoria and I kind of understood and spoke about having a champion within the company that can almost fight the corner in terms of Altran, in such a large company that works across the globe. Having a champion, which was myself and my previous boss, to kind of look after and grow the relationship is a huge benefit.
And did you have any concerns when you went into this process, Brooke? How much did you know about the condition? How did you approach it?
Absolutely nothing at all. But I didn't have concerns. I mean, we identified an issue. We were a small team with a very small budget, trying to build an intranet from scratch on marketing and communication knowledge, which isn't. We needed technical knowledge, and we met with David, and he kind of explained everything, and we said, "Oh, we could outsource this issue of building our intranet that was on my to-do list but kept falling down the priority list." And we kind of just said, "This could work. Let's trial it. Let's have a go." And as I said, kind of 3 years down the line, it's still really successful.
By David, you mean David Schatz, our founder?
Yes, exactly.
Thank you for sharing that. Shall I go to Louisa now, because you have experience in the field too? Same question for you. What are the things that, what are the steps for sourcing employees with this very specific condition? And when you were going through such a process, did you have any concerns? Did your team have any concerns? And how did you navigate that?
Yeah, so I think maybe sort of the one thing that I think would be useful to highlight here is that, as you know, as somebody who suffers with fibromyalgia, when I've been thinking about roles that I've been applying for, you know, I've always been very careful to make sure that those roles will realistically work with my condition. So there are some jobs out there that I know I will never be able to do. And that's just the way it is. That's fine. But if you can really focus your mind and think about the roles that would be possible with this condition, so in roles where there is flexibility around, you know, hours, whereas there's potentially limited travel, because travel can sometimes be quite tiring, the candidate then targets the roles, and it makes it so much easier then when they are applying for those roles to talk to those potential employers about maybe some adjustments that role would potentially need in order for me to go into that role or someone else to go into that role. So that's, I'd say that it's very much about open communication and being honest with yourself, but being honest with your prospective employer to say, you know, here are my skills, this is what I can bring to you as a company, but here are my personal limitations, and this is, you know, this is the type of flexibility that I will need in order to excel in this job. And I think if you can have that open conversation from the start, then the expectations are set, and then you are setting yourself up for success. I guess from the perspective of an employer, I think it's, you know, I'm not sure, and I'm not speaking from my own employer's perspective here, I'm just talking generally. I'm not sure if we are in a place yet in society where employers are proactively going out to find candidates who are from this, I guess, you know, this pool, which is a shame, because I think it you know, as a result, there is some talent out there who employers are not finding, because they are maybe not applying for the roles because they're worried that they can't do those roles. So I think there generally is some more that employers can do around promoting any kind of you know, invisible disability, and people with those invisible disabilities to come, you know, to come and apply for jobs here. You know, we will make adjustments for you, we can make this work. So a lot more needs to be done on that, I think.
Thank you for sharing that. You've made some interesting points that I'd like to come back to, but in the meantime, we actually have a question already from Patricia. She asks, by law, do potential employees have to divulge any long-term illnesses? And what are the pros and cons in doing so? Why don't we start with you, Louisa, because you have the mic at the moment, but then I'll go to Brooke and Ruth for that same question.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really difficult one, because, you know, again, thinking about when I've gone, you know, applied for jobs, and I've thought about how much should I be disclosing at the application stage? Is it going to put an employer off when they know that I have potentially some limitations in what I will be able to do? So that is a really difficult one. But I think, again, it comes back to the point around picking the right type of job. Because if you're, say, for example, applying for a job where you can predominantly work from home, and you know that one of the something that, you know, exacerbates your ME is, you know, having to get on a train and travel and the stress of traveling, then that role is going to be more suitable for you than one where you're having to spend 2 hours on a train every day. So in those situations, I don't see why, you know, you would necessarily hold back from being open to potential employer around, you know, this is a medical condition that I'm living with. I can manage it as long as there are these adjustments in place, because it suits that particular role. if those adjustments are never going to suit that particular role, like for example, I used to be, when I was, you know, in my late teens, early 20s, I was a waitress. I love that job. There's no way I could do that job now. I couldn't run around with plates of food, be on my feet all day. So if I applied for a job as a waitress and I said, oh, but you know, I can't stand on my feet all day, I'm never going to get that job. So it comes back again to just being really careful and thinking through the type of roles that you're applying for.
I want to come back to that actually, because it's very, very interesting. Brooke and Ruth, anything on the pros and cons of being very open with your potential employer from the beginning?
I mean, from my side, I think, as Louisa just said, if the role's correct, then I don't see it as a con. You fit the needs of the role, so why would it work against you?
Ruth?
I think it really depends on the individual and the role. I think there are ways of trying to identify whether an employer is potentially more sort of disability friendly. There's schemes like the 2 ticks scheme, which, you know, an employer can put on their website or during an application pack, which essentially says that they are committed to being, you know, having policies friendly towards disabled people. That may make you feel more open about disclosing at application stage. However, usually your employer isn't allowed to ask you any sort of health-based questions during recruitment. It's only once they've offered you a role. So it's important to remember that if you want to, that's great, but you know, you're not beholden to. And when it does come to disclosing, it may be that you want to prepare something, a written statement, rather than have a conversation initially. That way you can really ensure that you're communicating exactly how the condition impacts you and what adjustments or otherwise you may want to see in your work.
Thank you both, for all three of you, for that. I will now go to Evan and Victoria from the employee perspective. When you live with this condition, there are adjustments you have to make to your life and to your career. And to Louisa's point earlier, when you go into your job search or when you decide what kind of career you want to have, what are some of the practical points that you would like to share in terms of, you know, how you plan your career, from fields to go into to how you go about searching for a job? Shall we start with Evan, please?
Thank you. So I work in marketing, and for me, a role has to be within a close distance. I previously worked in the city, which is about a 2-hour commute, and during my initial stages of diagnosis, that was very unreasonable, because standing on a train during rush hour and being on a train was firstly stress inducing, which increased my symptoms, and the length of the day is very fatigue inducing. That's the reality of it. So when I apply for jobs, my first thing is the distance. How far is it and how can I get there? If I can get there via my car, that is amazing. But also, if the job, and most marketing jobs nowadays can be done from home because they involve a laptop and a computer, that can be done at home. That does not need to be done all the time in an office. And if you do have and most employers, once you've been there, I'd say a few months, like you pass that initial probation stage, they trust you enough to be able to do your job from wherever. You don't need to prove to them anymore that you're going to skive off for 10 minutes to go for a Greg's at lunchtime. You know, you can have that flexibility. But for me, I always look at how far away the role is, and is it going to be increase my energy levels? Is it going to require me to be running here, there, and everywhere?
Thank you for sharing that. Victoria, you have a success story with Brooke. You two work together, and you have, from what I have noticed, a wonderful relationship. I think a lot of the attendees could learn from what you two have put together. So can you give us a few pointers on what you've done?
I think the first thing, and it's not an easy thing to say, but you have to be really ruthlessly pragmatic in your approach. You really need to sit down, think about what your capabilities are as much as you can. IT skills are never a bad investment. Do as much market research as you can. Astriid has a great jobs forum. See what's out there. Tailor your skills and your learning to match that, the opportunities that fit. Voluntary work is a really good first step. because since I've had my job, I've learned an awful lot about how to manage my condition with a job, because there are new things to take into account. And I would also say, just know the benefit system. There are sort of benchmarks and boundaries within that that can make a difference to what choices you make around work, and be open-minded. I have a maths and computer science degree. I'm technically working in a marketing job. A great fit doesn't necessarily look on paper how you might initially expect it to.
Thank you for sharing that, Victoria. I'm going to go back to Louisa now, because you said we were talking about the word flexible. I think we would benefit from getting some examples. What kind of adjustments do employers have to make when hiring people with ME CFS? What kind of flexibility is required? And we have a question that ties in with that from Elizabeth. Other than needing flexibility and working from home, what needs do you, as employers, come across from people with ME CFS, and has there been any difficulties implementing them? I think there is such importance about being honest with some things that are not doable. That's her question. So it's a bit of a long question from my side.
That's okay. So, I think everybody who suffers with chronic fatigue syndrome, ME, and myself, fibromyalgia, we're all different. So there is no one set of rules you apply in terms of adjustments that an employer would need to make. So I think it comes down to that open communication between an employee and their manager to talk about that individual and the adjustments they need. So, for example, for me personally, I had some later starts. When I was going through some really difficult fibro flares, I agreed with my manager that I would start at 10 o'clock, because in the mornings I was so groggy, I was useless to anyone. And I was very lucky that my manager, was very understanding, and we had that open conversation, and I was able to start later. For some other people, that wouldn't necessarily apply. Maybe they're better in the morning, and later on in the day, they suffer with more fatigue. So I think that the adjustments need to be tailored to the individual, but also bearing in mind, what are the requirements of that role? So, for example, when I had that adjustment, if I had a role where they needed, it was a requirement for me to be actively doing something at 8 o'clock in the morning, that adjustment wouldn't have worked. So it needs to be a partnership about the adjustment the individual needs, but also the role they have. So in those cases, it may be worth, having a conversation with your manager to say, I'm struggling in the mornings. I do have this task that I need to do by 9 o'clock every morning. Can we move things around? Can you allocate that particular task to somebody else? And maybe I take on one of their tasks that could be completed later on in the day. So I'd say flexibility and openness are the key elements here. So did that cover the longer question as well? Sorry.
I think it did. Are there any other general examples of adjustments that one might need to maybe in terms of how you manage a project, rather than, for example, having daily deadlines, perhaps having weekly ones, and so on and so forth? Brooke, I see you nodding. Would you like to help us?
So I think the reason that Victoria and I's relationship has been so good is because she manages a project. She doesn't have daily deadlines because she works 2 hours a day, and that's not gonna, if you want something on a Friday, in normal business world, you'd say to somebody maybe Wednesday, or in my case Thursday afternoon, that you need it for Friday morning. That's not going to work with somebody with ME or CFS. So I think it's the managing of a project is such a successful thing. And in terms of the longer question, we haven't, other than working from home and complete flexibility and openness, we haven't had to do anything else, I don't think. If Victoria needs to take the day off, she'll just call me and say, I don't feel well, and she'll either book in sick because you're still entitled to sickness, or she'll work when she can. I think it's the culture, the working culture that we are hopefully getting towards a bit more with COVID is flexibility, and you don't have to be in a 9-to-5 job anymore, regardless of your needs. So hopefully that will move towards that a bit more.
So what I'm hearing is that perhaps a longer term project assignment is a better fit for someone suffering from the condition, rather than, you know, thinking, okay, I'm going to go into this 9-to-5, even if I am working from home with daily deadlines or deadlines every other day. That might be a bit too stressful or even not doable.
Yeah, and for someone like us, we needed a job doing. We didn't have time to do it, so outsourcing that was a great idea and has been successful. So if you've got something that is on your job list, is a priority, but you haven't been able to get to, there's no reason at all why you can't look for other answers to meet that.
Thank you, Brooke. I have another question from an attendee. I think it's a good fit for Ruth. As an employee, this is Kaylee saying, as an employee with ME, I have found that working from home due to COVID-19 has had a positive impact on employers' attitude to home working and flexible dynamic work. Do you think that these changes will be permanent in the new normal?
That's a really good question. I mean, I hope, my organisation hopes that COVID will provide opportunities going forwards, and we can reframe how we look at work, and that hopefully those changes will have a positive impact on people with ME who do face challenges sort of accessing work and maintaining work. As an employer, we've been thinking long and hard about this, and we have a number of employees who have ME, and that adds great value to their work, as you can imagine, given the roles that we do. We've been implementing permanent changes off the back of COVID, things like having a 50-50 work from home system, so people can do up to 50% of their hours from home. We've tried and tested it. I think it's really important that as employers, we don't just slip back into the old ways of working, because that's what we've always done, but we take a really asset-based approach, both to what the positives of COVID may be going forward, but also to what people with ME can do in the workplace, whether that's from home or sat at the desk.
Thank you. Now, we spoke about having the somewhat difficult conversations with your employer, but then there's another layer to being in a workplace, and that is your colleagues. How do you have that conversation with your colleagues? How do you make them aware? I mean, I assume the manager would deal with some of that, but at the same time, you have to work with them every day. You want to build a positive relationship with them, but at the same time, you also have to be aware of the potential negative impact that any kind of so-called preferential treatment might have on the team, because I've had a lot of conversations with people where they told me, well, people thought I was getting special treatment just because I was allowed to either work from home or have a different deadline, or just where my desk was positioned in the room, that caused an issue within a team. So there's all these small things that can cause such a fuss in the workplace. So how do you build that relationship? Where does the manager come in to help with that? Evan, would you like to share a little bit of your experience?
Yeah. So for me, I've always been very open with colleagues when I've started at new roles, because I think it's on me to be able to tell them. Because if I have a flare up during the day at work or anything happens to me, I need my employees, my colleagues to know what's going on, because otherwise they're going to be like, what the hell, what's going on? Is she okay? Has she got anything wrong with her? And also I have found in the past that some of my colleagues have found it, like you've said, special treatment because you've been able to go for a hospital appointment or you've been able to work from home. Now, as Ruth would say, and I imagine Louisa would back me up here, the ME and chronic fatigue syndrome is listed as a characteristic of the Equality Act. So you have got protection. You can go for your hospital appointment or make the time up and go for the hospital appointment without feeling like you're missing out and you're getting special treatment, because at the end of the day, you have a condition. You didn't choose to have the condition. You're working with it. You're working with it to be able to work and carry on as normal. And I do find the conversation to be really challenging at times, because I imagine that Victoria and Louisa might back me up here. ME and fibro have had such bad reps in the past where people have seen it as a bit of a sicky day and a bit of a laziness and, oh, I've got a pain, I must have fibro, that type of thing. So you do have the unfortunate, quite uncomfortable conversation when you're feeling, at first you're having an argument and they get to it and they're like, oh, I think I understand that now. So when I have a lay in bed one morning, that's not fatigue, that's just me being tired, like there's a difference. And I think from my point of view, I've benefited from having those honest conversations with my colleagues and taking it in my control, because I can't control what they think, but I have the power to be able to educate them and teach them about the condition. It's not on my managers to be able to say to my colleagues and my team, Evan has this, so you need to look after her, because no, that's my responsibility. I need to communicate and make them aware, because that's on us. We have a lot to manage, but just telling your colleagues, being open, making it part of the conversation, putting it in an informal manner, saying, oh, if I'm a bit irritable in the morning, or I'm needing an extra can of Coke in the afternoon, or just something that's so minor, and they're thinking, Christ, she knocks it back with the old Coke. That's not because I've got a sweet tooth, that's because I really like the caffeine, you know. But no, I think having an informal conversation and taking back some control, and you telling them, you talking to your colleagues and saying, I have this condition, it's not going to go away, please, if you can, just be mindful.
Thank you for sharing that. Victoria, how have you built your relationship with your colleagues? And I also heard a very important word earlier, boundaries, because you have to have those, you have to set them, and you have to set expectations. And of course, that's another layer of potential difficulty, especially in the beginning. So do you want to share some of your experience on that, please?
So, I mean, in a way, I have a position of extreme privilege. I think that it is very important, if you have ME or another chronic health condition, especially one, as Evan said, that is poorly understood and society in general is quite hostile towards. Having an employer who takes inclusion seriously and values the contribution that you make is really important for somebody like us. It just immediately removes a lot of the problems. On a personal level, I find that the problem is often people don't know very much about chronic illness, and they're really, really nervous of saying the wrong thing and offending the person or causing some kind of problem. So I spend a lot of time when I am sort of, if I'm interacting with somebody enough that they kind of need to know that I have a health problem.
I think we may have lost Victoria.
I try and be very.
Oh, there we go.
Sorry, but when I'm interacting with new people and I'm interacting with them enough that they have to understand where I'm at a little bit, I will try and give them explicit permission to be honest with me. I try and make it safe for them to talk to me about what they need. Obviously, most people want to be helpful. They're not malicious, they just don't know very much. You do get the odd problem. Fortunately, I have not experienced that in my current job. So I think you do need to protect yourself and set boundaries if boundaries being crossed is you are concerned about. But I think being open and honest and pragmatic with your employer and with your colleagues is the best way to approach that.
Thank you, Victoria. Ruth, you probably have a wealth of experience here too. Could you kindly share some of the positive examples you might have in terms of these conversations, how to better have them? If there's any negative examples you have in terms of a situation being poorly managed, and things that our attendees could learn from that, I would be most grateful.
I mean, firstly, I think we really do need to acknowledge that ME is a very unique condition because there is a lot of misinformation and stigma and unfortunately disbelief about it. So I'd encourage any employer to really just read up on it, try and find out some information, get a good knowledge base for it. It can be difficult taking that first step to have a conversation with an employee, but reach out. There's organisations, you know, such as yourselves. There's also ACAS, there's Action for ME. We have a guide for employers about ME, which is very much just the facts and some of the questions that you may ask and how you can approach conversations with your employees in a really supportive way. So it's freely downloadable on our website. The flip side of that, we also have a talking to your employer about ME. So for people that are going into a workplace or potentially have had a first diagnosis themselves and want to start those conversations with it. And I think that's really key. But some really practical steps that employers can take. I've mentioned earlier about taking an asset-based approach. Don't go into it thinking, oh, what can't this person do because of their ME? But let's talk about what we can do. One helpful question can be, what strategies do you already use to manage your ME? One thing that many people with ME will use is pacing, where you sort of understand your levels of you know, energy and when you can do things. And that can really then help inform conversations around working hours. At our office, we have a quiet room with curtains and some chairs, so that if people just need to go and have you know, some time away from their desk in a darkened room, then that's freely available. And we are always open to conversations with people around flexibility in their working hours. Travel to a role has been mentioned already, and that can really sort of take a toll on people. So potentially flexing their hours so they avoid rush hour, so they don't have a 40-minute commute when it could just be 15 minutes in the car. It's small steps, and often they're at no cost. And if there is cost needed, then it's really good to speak to the DWP and the Access to Work scheme. You can often, particularly if you're a smaller employer, have all of these adjustments made for free. That might be different desks, it might be noise cancelling headphones for someone that may have noise sensitivity. So don't be afraid to reach out, seek advice from the experts out there, and then approach it really with a what can we do to support you. And you will probably find that you'll have an excellent employee that will stay with you for years because they really value the approach that you've taken as an employer.
And to add to that, and potentially help educate some of the people that are looking to employ people from this talent pool, what are, in your experience, some of the most common myths or misconceptions when it comes to ME?
Is that for me? Well,
yes.
How long is this webinar? I mean, unfortunately,
some of them.
I mean, there was an awful phrase that was coined in the 80s, which was yuppie flu. So the idea that it's something that you know, affects the middle class, or that is predated on someone being effectively lazy. You know, these are not things associated with ME, and I'm sure other people have further examples of you know, the stigma and disbelief that exists around this condition.
And someone is asking, there's a lot of questions that we're getting from our attendees, so if we don't get to all of them, we'll send out a newsletter over the next few days with the answers. But one of the common questions is, who can I go to if I feel like I'm being treated unfairly? So I think that's a question we should answer in this webinar. If people feel like their rights aren't being respected, who can they go to?
So Action for Me has a helpline. It's completely free. It's open from 10 till 5 on weekdays. You can call us. We can give you some tips about how to approach those conversations. We have an advocacy service, so we can work one-on-one with individuals. And one thing we often do within that service is to help them request reasonable adjustments, helps to centre it into the rights that you hold. So there's the Equalities Act, which is a really important right for people with ME, and we can help you to understand how that applies to your work. There's also the Health and Safety at Work Act, which is another angle at which we can look at, you know, why reasonable adjustments are needed and things like that. There's also various trade unions out there, and I know that TUC themselves have an excellent disability passport, which is a template that you can use to request reasonable adjustments. And it really lays it out in quite a good step-by-step way that you can plot out what you want to ask for and the reasons behind it.
And there's another question that has a bit of a legal side to it, again asked by a number of our attendees in similar ways. What happens if an employee gets the condition while being in employment? What are their rights then? How can they have that conversation? And this question is for everyone. What do you do in that situation? How do you tell your employer? Again, we discussed how do you do it at the beginning, but if something happens during your employment, there will be adjustments that will likely have to be made to potentially your job description, how you deliver in your role, how you continue, and so on and so forth. So what's the best way to approach this? I'll start with Brooke.
Well, I mean, I'm not sure I'm probably the best person, but I think at the end of the day, you're an employee, and if you've got an issue, the same as anybody, you just need to talk to your HR team, and that they're there to help. It's for that openness and that flexibility that should be embedded in most companies' cultures nowadays, that you can work around as long as you can meet the needs of your role, then it's fine.
And if they cannot?
I mean, that's probably a discussion that you have with your line manager, and you work out what's best to do. I mean, it's not something that we've come across. So yeah, it's not an issue we've had to face yet.
Louisa, would you like to weigh in on that?
Yeah, so from my personal experience, I developed fibro whilst being employed. I'd been there for about 4 years at that point, and it was I'd had a really, really bad flu, and I never really properly recovered from it. And my employer was amazing, and they gave me support. They helped adjust my hours. I saw occupational health, and ended up with my diagnosis. And as a result, they made adjustments to my working hours and my working pattern. I work from home 2 days a week, and this is going back like 3-4 years ago. So I think it's similar to when you join somewhere. In some ways, it's probably a bit easier, I'd say, because you already have that relationship built up with your employer, with your manager, and that openness to hopefully have those conversations. If you aren't in that fortunate situation where your manager is as supportive as they should be, then definitely find out who you should speak to from an HR perspective, because there is an obligation from an employer to make adjustments that are needed when you have any form of disability. But you need to be mindful of the fact that, again, going back to my example from earlier, if I had ever developed fibro when I was a waitress, I think it would have got to the point where I just couldn't do that job anymore, and there were no adjustments that they would be able to make. And then you have to have quite an open conversation with your manager around whether or not this job is right for you. Is there a different job in the company that maybe you can do as well? But I'd say as a starting point, it's having that conversation with your manager.
Thank you, Louisa. Evan, Victoria, any advice from your perspective for someone that might be going through that situation?
So I actually developed ME while I just started at a company. I'd been at the company, I think, for about 3 months, and I started developing symptoms, and it was a very stressful time, because for the first 3 months of that time, I was loving the job. I was really embracing the whole new working culture following my departure and graduation from university. I started, and I then spent 3 months of that new time on sick leave in hospital, in and out of hospital, then ruling out various illnesses. And when I returned, I did experience discrimination. I did experience some really poor management and some misunderstanding, both from the HR and the team around me. I think a lot of what the problem was there was, number one, I was on probation. So for me, I didn't really have a leg to stand on, really. I think they would have just used that against me. They said, well, I remember having my HR meeting and trying to say, look, can I just have some form of adjustment, whether that be 1 day a week working from home, or coming in when the rush hour was on and leaving when the rush hours aren't on. And they turned around and they said, you should have known about your health condition before you got the job. And it was as blunt as that. And unfortunately, you don't know when ME is going to flare up, and you don't. And I would love for employers who are watching this now to think about how they have these conversations with someone, because an ME diagnosis is not one you want to have It's not something you get rid of. And I've had a few people say to me, they're trying to like prove me wrong when I'm talking about it. They bring up the NHS guide that says some people make a recovery, and they use that as, you're lying, you're going to recover soon. Well, no, I don't know that. It's very unknown. It's very unpredictable. You don't know what's around the corner, and you just have to take day by day. And so when you first start, when I was in my company and I'd been there for 6 months, trying to have that conversation was really difficult because I hadn't been there for very long. I didn't know how they were going to handle it. I didn't know how they were going to have the conversation. And I eventually had to leave because they just wouldn't make the adjustments, and they were causing my mental health to become as worse as my physical health. And I think sometimes you have to take back control and think, for me, long term, I can't hack this. I need to go, because if they're not going to put the adjustments in place, my health is going to get worse as a result of it.
Thank you for sharing that, Evan. Victoria?
I would say follow your company procedures, talk to HR, know what your rights are, seek help from outside organisations like the organisation Ruth works for. And just, if at all possible, have an employer in the first place who sees you as a valuable asset. Don't work for people that are using you as a diversity checkbox, if at all possible, because you need to have a relationship with an employer where you are taken seriously and you are respected.
Thank you, Victoria. Ruth, anything to add to what we've just heard?
I think Victoria's point about really being familiar with sort of your staff handbook, your policies and all of that is really key. Unfortunately, if you do end up in a contentious situation with your employer, you want to be able to demonstrate that you've done everything by the book in terms of how you've approached it. And so I would really recommend, read your grievance policies, read your staff handbook, seek advice if you have a union, or call ACAS or someone, just so that you can be really secure in how you're approaching it.
Thank you. We're quickly approaching the end of the webinar, so I want to go around the room. If there's one thing that you would like an employer or other employers to know about hiring someone with ME CFS, what would that thing be? Shall I start with Brooke?
Yeah, sure. So that they are a huge asset to your company. I mean, Victoria has been so helpful and so useful for us in so many different ways. I mean, we're a very small team. It's just the two of us in marketing and communications for the UK. So as you said, we have a very good relationship, but she, as she said, has a computer science degree. I have a marketing degree, and together to build our intranet works perfectly. It's just so important that you understand the role that you have in front of you and that they can fulfill, and that the culture within the company is the correct kind of culture.
Thank you, Brooke. Louisa?
Yeah, I think from an employer perspective, I think you need to be really careful not to make assumptions or label people. You need to look at the individual for their specific skills and what they can contribute to your organization. And if you can focus on that, then providing the job, allows that flexibility, you can work hopefully around the rest. They can adjust their hours, they can travel at different times, they can have different equipment that helps with discomfort. Those adjustments can be made. You need to really focus on how is this person going to excel and how can I help them excel, I think.
Thank you. Evan?
I think our lives and our talents are more than our illness. I think our illness almost gets taken as the definition of us. I think as soon as you mention it, they start questioning you for your ability. I think that employers, you need to see them as what they're putting on paper. If you take the illness out of the equation, they bring to you their attitude, their ability, their talents, their degrees, their education, their experience. That to me means more than my illness. My illness is unfortunately something I deal with every day. But what I bring to a team, my ability to be a team player, my initiative, my enthusiasm is me. That's not because of my illness. My illness hasn't brought that. I've brought that to the table. And we're smart individuals. I don't like to be a big head when I say that, but we are. We're not Simple. We're not dimwits as a result of our condition. Unfortunately, that is the label you get. And we're better than our illness. And I think employers need to put that to one side and look at what they're bringing to the interview, their table, their application, and see their talents and their education, their experience as more than the illness.
Thank you, Evan. Victoria?
So the thing that I really want to say to employers is that don't look at us as a diversity hire, look at us as a business opportunity. You don't need to sell people with chronic illness or people on it with ME as something that you're doing for the disabled person. We have a unique set of skills, we have a unique set of talents, and we are a unique type of resource. If you have a job that isn't going to take full-time hours, look at somebody with chronic illness. If you have a shorter contract, or you want somebody, but you want somebody who's willing to work from home because you don't have the office space or you don't want more office space. There are situations and types of job where a chronically ill person is a better choice than a healthy person. Just as Louisa was saying, there are jobs that I will never be able to do because of my chronic illness. So we make bottom line sense, and we need more flexibility from you, but we give it back. You can ask for exactly what you need, because we are more willing to be flexible because we can't meet the normal 9 to 5 standard.
Thank you so much, Victoria. Ruth, for the conclusion.
Sure, I think as most people have said, really, just see the person, not the illness or the disability, and you won't go too far wrong with that. But I think it's also important to approach it as you're on a journey together, your employee and the employer. It's not just about having one conversation at the outset and agreeing some reasonable adjustments and leaving it there. Keep the communication going, keep it transparent, regularly review, ask, is this working? Is there more we need to do? Do we need to approach things differently? And yeah, just recognise that there will be a fluctuating nature to this. So keep that communication open and don't be afraid to ask.
Thank you. This is everything we had for today. Get in touch with us by going to our website. When there, click on Join Our Community at the top of the homepage. Tell us about your journey so far and what we can do to support you. Or if you feel ready to, volunteer with Astriid and help others who may benefit from your experience and insights. If we didn't get around to answering your questions, we will do so via our website. So make sure you join the community. We will also include a recording of the webinar and its key insights with a newsletter going out to all of you over the coming days. Thank you all panelists, Brooke, Victoria, Evan, Louisa, and Ruth, and attendees for joining. And until next time, stay safe.